What is up, fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Favale coming at you with another 2023-2024 NBA team look ahead. We are on to what I thought was going to be the ultra quiet Phoenix Suns this time of year. Since it is the Phoenix Suns, you know what that means. We have the fellas from the Timeline podcast. If you listen to this podcast, you know how much I love that podcast. Mike Vigil, Sam Cooper, follow them on Twitter. Mike is at Protected Pick, spelled exactly as it sounds. Sam is at S Cooper Hoops, also spelled exactly as it sounds. I can't help, Sam, but read your handle as Scooper Hoops all the time, though.
That's okay. That's as intended.
So, yeah, I'm like, I have to rehearse pretty much before I voice yours in the podcast. Guys, how are you doing? Let's start with, Mike, how are you doing? Let's start there.
I have a lot on my mind, Dan, and I was thinking about, this offseason. Every offseason is not complete without us coming on to this podcast and doing this look ahead. And I believe it was 3 years ago, I was on this podcast at the moment Chris Paul was traded to the Suns. So I feel like there's some level of expectation that something will happen at this point. Like, I feel like I have to check my phone if I get a Twitter notification at this point, because if there's any proof that the Suns are willing to do something this late in the offseason, I think that was it.
Yeah, I forgot about that. And we actually mentioned it last year, probably like in reference to the Kevin Durant stuff, or is that just going to crop up again while we were recording that look ahead? So I don't know if I would want, I don't really want it to break during the podcast. So fingers crossed it doesn't. Sam, how are you doing?
Well, I also don't want any major news to break during this podcast, but somehow something always happens. We'll talk about it, Mike. We'll talk about it in a bit.
It would be fun.
Something always happens with this team in late September, it seems. I'm doing really great, Dan. Thanks for having us on again. This is legitimately one of my favorite things that we get to do every year. You're always super prepared with your questions, and obviously you guys do a great job with this pod as well.
Yours is one of the toughest to prepare for, because I like to listen or consume all the content. And I listen to you guys regularly, but I fall behind in the off season. So I've been consuming external development. There was the Patreon episode, which I guess we're going to have to start with that subject matter. And I don't really want to, but what do we make of, Sam, the use of Nurkic stuff? It makes more sense now. OG Anunoby's name is out there. Just what are your impressions of the reporting that's been there so far?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a fun couple of days online after some weeks of nothingness for Suns fans, I suppose, because we have something to argue about again, obviously. I'm not the biggest fan of Jusuf Nurkic. If we just want to talk about the one-to-one player comparisons, I guess I'm less interested in that. But I think we can start with, this feels more real than some recent rumors have surrounding the team. It certainly makes logical sense that the Suns would be interested in moving on from Deandre Ayton. We've been talking about it for literal years. As far as we know, they've been kind of shopping him around for years now. So obviously a guy who regressed pretty heavily in the past season, particularly on defense, had a rough go of it in the playoffs in the series against the Denver Nuggets. So there's all sorts of stuff we could talk about there. Now, is Nurkic an upgrade? No, he is not. So it all depends on what else you get back in that trade. I think Anunoby would be freaking awesome. I think that's also super unlikely to come back in a Deandre Ayton trade. So I don't know your thoughts on Anunoby's probability of coming to the Suns there, Dan. It's probably pretty low.
I will say I think OG Anunoby's become pretty overrated. He's a fantastic defender, and his shooting is good, but we need to envision this is the year that OG Anunoby does stuff on the ball. It's not, the ship has sailed, I think. I would be pretty surprised, though, and I'm guessing, Mike, you feel the same way, if you turn Deandre Ayton into Anunoby. I guess you're taking back, you guys voiced this on your podcast, you're not taking back Nurkic as an asset. It would basically be, that's part of the deal, is you have Nurkic's contract and you're getting OG Anunoby. It's probably part of some complicated Damian Lillard trade where he's going to Toronto, or maybe another team's involved. I think it's slightly more likely just because OG Anunoby will not sign an extension, because financially it probably still doesn't make sense, even with the 140% rules. But it just feels like if you can turn Deandre Ayton, when his value feels like it's at his absolute nadir, into Anunoby and Nurkic, would you view that as a win, Mike?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. I think that would be incredible. Is there anything exciting about Nurkic by himself? No, of course not. There's nothing exciting about that, especially as a player who's perpetually injured. But Anunoby is kind of exactly what the Suns starting lineup needs. I think if you're the Suns front office and you're looking at a team that now has 3 players traditionally that can be the player that has the ball the most on most teams in Bradley Beal, Devin Booker, and Kevin Durant, and you're saying, do we need to pay a center $30 million to be the center on that team, especially when you don't really have a wing defender that's going to be tasked with guarding the best player on the alternate team? Then I think it makes sense to try to flip Deandre Ayton into like maybe a more traditional $15 million center, if you want to call Nurkic that. I know he makes a little bit around there.
Yeah, 16 around there.
Yeah. And then of course try to get that wing that sort of completes that starting lineup in a different way. I do think Suns fans are all, they're really having a hard time with this. I think for multiple reasons, because one, the only name that's been mentioned is Nurkic, right? So we don't know anything else that's involved. Jake Fisher threw out Anunoby as I don't know how sourced that was, or if it was just like, this makes sense kind of reporting. And of course that makes everyone feel a little better about it. But I do think it's a complicated thing where this is every team, every trade. The fans of the team don't understand the trade value of the player that they are likely going to be sending out. And that's Suns fans not fully understanding DeAndre Ayton's trade value at this point. And it's so dependent on, like, if Portland really wants DeAndre Ayton and the Suns are able to capitalize on that, they nailed it, because I'm not sure there's a lot of other teams that are clamoring to pay him $30 million at this point.
No, I mean, they're in a situation where they could at least justify it. And if I'm assuming Anunoby's would be involved just because contract year, they're probably not going to pay him, even though he's fairly young based on his timeline, especially when they just gave Jeremy Grant all the money. But Sam, I think what's interesting here is it felt like they have telegraphed all offseason, the Suns, that they're really trying to repair the DeAndre Ayton relationship. And so what do you make of that against these rumors, which is why my theory is like it would have to be super worthwhile, I think, for them to pivot this way after. But we've seen DeAndre Ayton's defensive ceiling, and it's pretty fucking high. And if you think that under Frank Vogel he gets better, or that Frank Vogel's able to reach him, if Nurkic is the name that's only being thrown out there, my immediate reaction is, if these are real, I need to know. We're talking Anunoby, but maybe it's someone else. Like, it has to be kind of this sexy acquisition for you to go that direction then.
Maybe yes and maybe no. I mean, to throw an intermediate outcome out there, Caleb Martin is another name that was thrown out there. If Lillard does end up going to the Heat, of like, how would you feel about Caleb Martin being that second player? Certainly a lot less sexy than Anunoby as a name. But I still think, a player who was one of the better players in the playoffs last year overall and would fit in great as the Suns' fifth starter. Regarding the whole narrative about Frank Vogel is going to come in and completely repair DeAndre Ayton's defense, I don't know. I've just never exactly bought it. I liked the Vogel acquisition. I think there's a lot he can bring this team in terms of his own championship experience and his ability to work with the star players. And I've had my issues with Monty Williams too, as I've outlaid on our podcast, but they weren't necessarily related to Monty's relationship with DeAndre Ayton, insofar as I think a lot of other Suns fans are kind of reading into that relationship being really what destroyed the Suns season last year. I think there's a certain level of exaggeration there between the rift in those two, their relationship, and kind of how it negatively affected the Suns. A lot of my frustrations with Monty Williams and why I wanted to see him replaced were more related to the offense and the offensive flow. And really, as we kind of get into diagramming how that's going to look going forward, it's, kind of like not playing Kevin Durant at center and things like that, maybe sort of more modern tactics. But defensively, a lot of it was just effort for DeAndre Ayton. And I don't know if the swap from Monty Williams to Frank Vogel is really going to make all that much of a difference. I hope it does, but I can't guarantee anything. Going back to what Mike said, I think a lot of Suns fans are still evaluating the DeAndre Ayton that we saw after that finals run, where he was mostly extraordinary. He's fallen a long way in the past 2 seasons. So I
think you can make the case that 3 of the last 4 postseason series the Suns have played in, DeAndre Ayton was not good. That's pretty rough.
The Pelicans first round series in 2022,
he was great
there, where he was awesome.
And then the Dallas series, no good. And then this year, I think the worst we've seen him play in the playoffs was this last postseason, I'd say.
So, I mean, let's just go there then. Where Mike was like, what's been the biggest form of regression from him on defense over the past couple seasons?
It is, I think, if you boil it down to effort, I think that's a fair thing to say. But if you're talking about what that means visually on the court, it's just being in the wrong place at the wrong time and not moving fast enough, not sprinting down the court offensively or defensively, not jumping towards the ball on rebounds. And, often on pick and rolls, he's just a little too far back, not playing up high enough, not moving his feet fast enough. And, he's still really great, I think, playing post defense. I think that's where his defense kind of stayed the same. And teams just stopped attacking him like that. They just moved to the pick and roll. And, I would say that for the last season plus the postseason, the other teams, the teams that were facing the Suns, their main attack on Deandre Ayton was putting him in as many pick and rolls as possible and trying to take advantage of that. And I think we saw it over and over and over and over again in the Denver series.
Yeah.
Not to say that that's an easy pick and roll to guard, of course, Jamal Murray, Jokic, but he was really fully taken advantage of in that one.
Not to say that Nurkic would do any better against that two-man game either, but it is very concerning that if you just put the two guys' stats up next to each other, just their rim protection numbers last year, Deandre Ayton should be grading out significantly better than Jusuf Nurkic as a rim protector, as we've seen him do in the past. But just last season, they were pretty similar. And Nurkic is 4 years older with a hefty injury history, so it's just not impressive.
So I agree with you. It felt definitely the pick and roll defense. I think even the Denver series is tough because I thought that Phoenix didn't always put Ayton in the best situations defensively, like depending on who they were attacking on the other side, like involved in that pick and roll. Like it felt Ayton was carrying too much of a burden. But with Nurkic, I feel like his role in Portland when you watch him defensively is just not as, I guess, complex or involved as Deandre Ayton's. Like he's not going to have to cover as much ground on a normal, like possession by possession basis as Deandre Ayton. And so I know you weren't saying he was an upgrade, but I would be very concerned about, at least with Ayton, and I'm not trying to evaluate that version of him, but like Sam, at least the theory of like, oh, we've seen Ayton reach that top level defensively still, like we know he's been there before. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that still has to hold some value when you're looking at, these specific rumors or just moving on from him in general. I do think it's probably pretty easy, especially given the defense that you got from him last year. You can approximate that on the cheap if you need to like go out and maybe get another big or like
Jock Landale outplayed Deandre in the playoffs. So we have to mention that Jock Landale barely in the NBA before that and still was able to outplay him in the playoffs. So yeah, you can definitely do it for cheap, I'd say.
Any other strong thoughts on like what is the path? I guess what's the path forward if Deandre Ayton is still here for him to like work on this team? Or do you have any, I guess we know what the path forward is because his offensive role can't really change now when you look at everyone who's here. Do you have any confidence, Mike, that this is someone who you can get? I know we talk about defensive buy-in, but that could be kind of satisfied with his offensive role and then give you enough. Like, is there any level of confidence or hope that he could do that?
So the best version of what it could be would be him fully buying into a defensive and rebounding role on this team and taking pride in that side of the ball. Because a lot of times the solution for a lot of people is, well, he has to be engaged offensively in order for him to be great on defense. And, every trade the Suns have made has sort of slotted him down in the rotation as far as offensive players on this team. He's not going to be taking the second most shots, which he did 2 seasons ago. And even last season, I think he fell even behind Mikal Bridges for a while there in field goal attempts, but that's mostly because of the injuries and Mikal Bridges taking a bigger role offensively during those injuries. He's going to be probably 4th in shot attempts on this team. So it's a challenge for Frank Vogel to find a way to get him to fully buy in to something on the defensive end that he hasn't yet fully done in previous seasons without consistently rewarding him with offensive touches. And that's going to be really hard to do. The thing that has to be the largest motivator for him is winning a championship because that's what does it. Now you can make the case that probably should have been a motivator for the previous few years as well. And I think at times it was. And so, the best case is everyone works with him really well. Attitudes are great. He gets along really well with Frank Vogel. And the hope is that doesn't fall apart at any point in the playoffs when the pressure's at its highest. And, the chances of that happening, I can't really say. He's an incredibly unpredictable player on the court. To know for sure what it's going to be like next year, I think would be a fool's errand if you're trying to make that speculation.
Bradley Beal, Sam, is on this team as well. Not mentioned him yet.
Pretty exciting.
I want to just step back here because I was a little bit surprised, like on a national level outside the market, the reaction to the Bradley Beal trade, where it felt like there was a lot of focus. Why would the Suns give up all their assets that are remaining and obliterate their depth? And then it's like, well, the assets they gave up, you were never going to get better value than Bradley Beal. And if your issue was with their depth, it felt like you're saying they shouldn't have really made, or their assets, you're saying they shouldn't have really made the Kevin Durant trade, that it wasn't really a Bradley Beal trade thing. And so I'm just, what was your reaction to the reaction? And do you think, had you at that moment told everybody what they were going to do with their minimum contracts, if that reaction would have then been much different?
The typical person who was giving that sort of reaction, I don't know how much their opinion would be swayed by the minimum contracts, because I just don't know that they were following the situation that in depth to that extent. It was sort of a classic knee-jerk reaction based on the way that the Suns went out in the playoffs, which I understand. You watch the Suns kind of get trounced and by the Nuggets there at the end. You watch the Suns having to give heavy minutes to players like Landry Shamet and Jock Landale, and you rely on clutch shots from TJ Warren just to eke out a couple of wins in that series. And of course, depth is going to be an issue, but I could not believe that they pulled this trade off. I could not believe that they pulled it off. It was absolutely, and like, what was the alternative? Would you have rather traded Chris Paul and Landry Shamet to the Washington Wizards for what? Daniel Gafford and Corey Kispert, and does that make the team better? Like you take the guy who has averaged 30 points per game in the past and still has a reasonable argument as a top 30 player in the NBA 100 times out of 100, and then you try to build around that.
Mike, so this like dovetails. So the Matt Ishbia era is what I really want to get into, because I feel like it's been very fascinating so far. The four things that stand out: the accessibility stuff with Suns games. I think that's just objectively cool. But so you have the Kevin Durant trade, the Bradley Beal trade, and then like kind of all the pick swap maneuvering after making the Bradley Beal trade. Just given everything that's happened, and even like there's the coaching change, of course. What has just been your early impressions of the Matt Ishbia era?
Well, he's going to spend a lot more money than Robert Sarver. I think we can
broke boy
say
Sarver, as you guys call him.
Yeah, we can say that for sure. He's not a broke boy. He's definitely out there trying to spend some money. I think that he seems like somebody who is very intent on this being a really long-term investment. And of course, you can say, well, he did trade all the assets for Kevin Durant to win right now. And that part is true. But, moving the Suns games off of cable and putting them on over-the-air TV here in Phoenix is not something that's going to make him a lot of money in the short term, but could make a lot of fans in Phoenix, long-term diehard fans, especially watching Kevin Durant and Devin Booker and Bradley Beal over the course of the next season. And, basketball wise, I think it's a sort of a different conversation. The willingness to make the moves that he did, the willingness to cash in on all the assets that James Jones has collected over the years is a risk. Kevin Durant's 35 years old. Obviously, Bradley Beal has an injury history. The franchise is still and continues to be on Devin Booker's back, as we know, and the ability for this team to mesh and to win obviously is going to say a lot about his decision-making basketball-wise. What you envision when you think of this perfect owner of a team is somebody who's not involved in basketball decisions. Is he that? No, he's not that. He's very involved in basketball decisions, and that ability to accept that is entirely dependent on the moves that are being made. Yeah, so the fact that the moves that are made so far are things that Sam and I think, sorry to speak for you, Sam, but agree with so far, is why everything is fine. As soon as things start to go south, or if things ever do start to go south with his involvement in basketball decisions, I think that will change maybe how we evaluate that relationship between him and the fans. Even dependent on if they trade Deandre Ayton for Jusuf Nurkic, there's going to be a lot of people who now hate Matt Ishbia, at least in the short term. And not me personally, but there will be a lot of people out there that will react negatively to that. But so far, so good, I think, is how I can put it.
Dan,
go ahead, Sam. Sorry.
No, are you a cord cutter? Do you have a cable package? I'm just curious.
We actually just cut the cord a few months ago.
Okay. Could you envision, because I know you're a New Yorker, could you envision Dolan mailing you an antenna to receive over-the-air television channels so you could receive your network affiliates?
Dolan doesn't like owning a sports team, apparently. Little shitbag. I can't stand that guy.
I mean, just to reiterate the fact that, these kind of what are right now unconventional moves on the part of Ishbia, and again, this is not basketball related, this is the money-making stuff, but has the potential to double our fan base over the next 10 or 20 years, potentially, at least in state. It's something to be really excited about, I think.
I do think making them accessible feels important, because I don't know how I feel about the people who say this is the most all-in team of all time. I still think, given the ages involved of that Nets team that gave their future to the Celtics for, what was ever left of Paul Pierce and KG was more all in. But when you look at, Mike had mentioned this, him being involved in basketball decisions, specifically, I come back to the Kevin Durant negotiations based on that reporting. And then this is not on him specifically, but now you start making those weird swap decisions with the Bradley Beal and then post Bradley Beal ones. And it's just uncomfortable, because you're saying we're so all in that if it doesn't work out, I think what you could hang your hat on, look at how young Devin Booker still is and the contract that he's on. And if it doesn't kind of work out, there's just shit oh, Devin Booker's just here all alone, and how sustainable would that be? So I worry long term, but I don't. Every single move that he has made, I think, for the Kevin Durant negotiation was fascinating. But I think everything he's done, I don't have a real criticism of, but now it's just when you're trying to scale ahead, I do wonder okay, this level of all in, if it does go bad, did you somehow, diminish the odds that Devin Booker would be here past the Bradley Beal, Kevin Durant window?
Can I just say that Kevin Durant's salary falls off the Suns' books right when Jason Tatum becomes a free agent? So just expect me to start that campaign relatively early to try to. I do think that their books are kind of clean. After that, now Bradley Beal complicates it
anymore unless they play for the Raptors, apparently.
Yeah, that's true. But I do wonder to what extent players will be interested in playing for an owner who cares about winning to this extent. Maybe that doesn't matter, and maybe I'm just being, the grass is greener on this side right now. But I do think that they have to make some proper moves in free agent. Look, we're not going to be able to trade Bradley Beal. It's not like that no trade clause goes away once he is traded to he still has that. That means that we're not going to be able to trade him anytime soon. And the moves they make beyond that is going to be really important for long-term success. But I think they are sort of looking at free agency as the next way to build this team long-term, because you can't do it if you have no draft picks. Now, they do actually have some. They're swapped picks, but we'll see how they actually manage that.
So they killed the minimum contract game, as we already mentioned. Sam and Mike, if you end up having a different answer to this, but Sam, as currently constructed, who do you view as their fifth most important player? And is that player the one that you would assume or pick to be in the starting five to round out that lineup?
It's so close. I'm
DeAndre Ayton. Just kidding.
I'm just kidding. He doesn't mean that. He's just being a troll.
That's good. Good on you for catching me on that. So who outside of the four household names?
Yes. I think Eric Gordon. But it's so close, and I'm not sure what Mike is going to say. I have a feeling Mike is going to say Eric Gordon too.
It's not close for me. It's Eric Gordon.
It's Eric Gordon. So for me, it's close, and it's Eric Gordon. And the reason I say that is because Eric Gordon is a known quantity, and there are some guys whose names are not Eric Gordon who I think have breakout potential. And if one of them can achieve breakout potential, then this conversation changes. For the time being, though, I don't have Eric Gordon in my starting lineup, but I do have Eric Gordon in a hell of a lot of our closing lineups, and I think that could be really fascinating to watch.
To me, there are a bunch of players who are on minimum contracts because they're not proven over time. And there's one player who's on a minimum contract because he wants to compete for a championship. And that's Eric Gordon. Eric Gordon is is a player that's probably too good for that. He's the only proven player who has playoff successes. And by the way, I don't know if you read the reporting on the Houston situation over his time in Houston, but my God, that team was a complete, and is still, by the way, a complete and total mess. And the idea that you can't even look at any of his time there, like the difference between, I think he shot 34% from three in Houston and 42% in the Clippers. And at first you look at that and you kind of write it off and say, well, that's just variance, whatever. And then you read the reporting on Houston and you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah, they're
awful.
They're trying to build their franchise around Kevin Porter Jr., which even aside from all the off-court stuff and the domestic violence allegations, which I've shit all over him on this podcast already, so we don't need to go into them further. But imagine like being in charge of an NBA franchise and thinking Kevin Porter Jr., based off what you see on the court, is, oh, we need to make sure Şengün can't start because Kevin Porter Jr. needs a lob threat.
Yeah.
So yeah, good for Eric Gordon for not completely flaming out there. Do you guys have a consensus? And I'll start with you, Mike. Assuming Deandre Ayton's one of the first five, who then becomes the sixth most important player for this team, Mike?
Okay, so that's interesting because if I'm looking them, I would personally start Eric Gordon. I've mentioned this on the podcast, but I understand the argument against that. I'm just saying, like, scorched earth offense, kill everyone on threes and see how it goes with that kind of spacing.
It would be bold. I think it would be kind of insane. And based on what we know of Frank Vogel, it's just not going to be the opening day starting lineup. But I respect the decision to try and go with that.
I will say it would be, and maybe this is galaxy braining it a little bit, but if you are worried about Bradley Beal on defense at the moment and like some of the assignments he might have to cover, Gordon can like defend up inside. Right? I don't know if Bradley Beal's probably not going to be able to do that as well.
It's the point guards that would kill us in those lineups, like the small guards. It would be Devin Booker guarding them.
I was going to say, I guess the Devin Booker all defense campaign, we're not going to start that.
I think he would. I think he's going to do fine. But I also think that in a team that probably is built, not to get too far off the question you asked, to switch everything, they're going to be able to attack whoever they want to attack, because if teams are playing like any sort of playoff style offense, the Suns are going to switch everything, and then they're probably going to go at Bradley Beal 100 times a game. Now, as far as the sixth most important player on the team, I think there's some obvious candidates, and obviously it's Yuta Watanabe, and it's not exactly like he's not proven either. Keita Bates-Diop, I think, is the next probably that name that you would mention, and then I actually think Eubanks is one that I might even say it's Eubanks to be that guy.
The trade has already happened in Mike's mind.
Well, if they have any thought of trading for Nurkic, they have to believe in Eubanks, because Nurkic isn't going to play every single game. And that means that Eubanks is going to be starting quite a bit if Nurkic was traded. So if there's any truth to these rumors, then they clearly believe in him. But when I watch film of all these guys, the one that stands out as a player that's probably better than his contract is Eubanks. Now, having said that, if Keita Bates-Diop can be a slightly better defender than he was, and then continue the 3-point shooting, and he's 6'9", basically, that's pretty unbelievable for a player, and that would be really amazing for the Suns. I think that I'm a little scared to go all in on believing in guys who have 1 year of great 3-point shooting and not a consistent track record of great 3-point shooting, which is Keita Bates-Diop and Yuta Watanabe. I'm a little scared still.
Sam, who is your sixth most important player?
It's Keita Bates-Diop. But to speak to what Mike is talking about, ultimately both him and Watanabe, I mean, Bates-Diop, I'm looking right here, 140 3-point attempts last year is what we're working with. So it's great that he shot 39% and well in the corners. And to speak to Watanabe as well, shot 52% in the corners. That is nuts, but that is also one season, and there's a reason these guys
and like 6 minutes contracts. A game.
yeah, exactly. So, but Bates-Diop is clearly the best intermediate option between himself, Watanabe, and Okogie is the other guy you have to at least include in this conversation. That he at least shot the three well last season and can also defend kind of between these two options. If you want to go all in on defense, you've got Okogie. If you want to go, I guess the best shooting option would be Watanabe. But Bates-Diop feels like the most versatile option. And I think that's why he is my pick to be the fifth starter on day one. We'll see how well it works.
So my co-host Grant Grant, if you guys are familiar with him, is obsessed with Keita Bates-Diop, and we got into wasn't an argument, but just like Keita Bates-Diop didn't hit a guarded three last year, and so I was like, I'm kind of skeptical of what he could do for this team offensively, and then
He's not going to be guarded on this
as Grant pointed out, he's not going to be guarded on this team anyway. Yeah. I still think I would lean as my fifth. I know I didn't give this most important player. I'm still a Yuta Watanabe guy. And I especially think if you want to kind of switch, I would definitely prefer him to. I feel like when you look at maybe a Diop and a Kogi, they're going to be better to handle these like singular top end assignments. But if you're looking to switch, I still think I trust Yuta Watanabe in that situation more. So I'm just curious what you guys think about that.
I think that what's nice about both of those guys, Yuta and Keita Bates-Diop, is they're both tall and capable of shooting threes. Now, the Suns' defense, of course, is going to be probably the biggest concern that we're looking at for this team going into the season, because the offense, obviously, they have all-stars offensively, 3 of them. And the way that size can make up for some defensive deficiencies, the way that could work on this team can actually be pretty interesting, because you can talk about putting Josh Okogie in, who plays bigger than he is. But then, Yuta's 6'9" and can shoot threes, and there's value in putting size out there. So I think there's a merit to what you're talking about. But I also think it kind of applies to Keita Bates-Diop too, as really long arms and size. Now, whether or not he's capable of defending on the perimeter is a question. I think Suns fans feel really confident in that, whereas I kind of want to see it a little bit first, and I'm excited to see it though, because I think that size could make a huge difference with 7-foot Kevin Durant. I mean, that's the cheat code.
Sam, is there any concern about the lack of non-star playmaking on this team? There's the element of me, just to preamble this, is I can't bring myself to care, because you look at the top end talent with Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal, and Devin Booker, and then it's like, okay, if one of them is out, that's when you could see things like kind of going off the rails a little bit. And so I'm just curious where you land on that.
Well, I actually think it's interesting because the Cameron Payne, the move to get rid of Cameron Payne was a little bit surprising to some of us. And, one guy we haven't brought up yet is Jordan Goodwin, who came in over in the Bradley Beal trade, who I think is going to get some minutes, at least in the regular season. I don't really see him at this point as a playoff rotation guy. Could be interesting at the point guard position, but there is a lack of what feels like a more stable backup point guard on this team. And I think that's led to even some rumors that have swirled around recently. I don't think any of them have especially caught on to be like, this is going to happen, but there is a hole there that could be filled at some point, whether it's now or in February, of bringing another point guard into this team who is a more adept playmaker than Eric Gordon or Jordan Goodwin to slide in next to either Booker or Beal in some heavy minutes. If you look at the rest of the team, though, I think most of these role players are either average or above average playmakers in their roles. I look at the Eubanks acquisition as a guy who I think can make some basic reads out of the center position. I look at some of these wings, not really Bates-Diop, but I've seen a little bit of evidence out of Watanabe. I've seen a little bit of evidence in the past out of Okogie. Eric Gordon obviously can make some plays. So, I think the role players for the most part are going to be fine. I still just wonder if there is a missing traditional playmaker on this roster who would really suit them well if, let's say, what happens in this season is what happened in the past several seasons, that Booker and Beal both end up playing 65, 70 games, and you need someone to fill in the gaps.
Sam, is this like an issue that you would expect them to prioritize when we get to buyout season, provided under the new rules, the player that was waived or bought out couldn't have been making more than, I think, 12.2 million is the number?
Yeah, 12
or
million.
Is it kind of a thing when you get to that point? To me, I look at it as like this void, if you even want to call it a void, this wrinkle, whatever. It's important to eat innings in the regular season, but if you're going to be reliant on, I don't care whether you got them on the buyout market or if you were going to be reliant on campaign come playoff time, then something else that you just weren't built to overcome had already happened.
Yeah, so the thing is, anyone they bring in has to be built for the playoffs. I don't think they're going to bring in someone just to eat innings. If they need someone just to eat innings in the regular season, they still have, obviously it's not ideal, but they've got Saban Lee on a 2-way contract. Like, I think there's a certain element of let's just throw anyone who can run an offense out there if we need someone for the regular season. If it's going to be a buyout candidate, it needs to be someone who can guard up and defend, which makes me less likely to think that they're going to bring in a 6'2", point guard with a 6'4" wingspan or whatever, just someone who is not going to be a capable defensive player at the playoff level. Are they going to be able to find that on the buyout market? I'm not really sure. I mean, I guess we'll just see how that develops between now and February, but it's up there as one of my priorities. It might not be priority number one either.
I just want to mention too that I am personally less confident in Jordan Goodwin, backup point guard on championship team, as a player. It's not to say that I don't think he's going to be good. I think there's a lot of well-earned hype on what he could potentially be, but he's not a great offensive player as he currently stands. A good defensive player, and there's just something. This team feels like it's missing a backup point guard to me, and getting rid of Campaign for nothing just to sign Bol was, I think, one of the only weird decisions of the offseason for me, just because Campaign, not exactly somebody that I'm super confident in after the last few playoff runs as well, but at least capable in the regular season. There is some trade slop that I'll mention to you, Dan, that I have yet to mention on any podcast so far.
Aggregators.
That is the rumor of a 4-team trade that was out there for the Suns with Deandre Ayton going out. Included Nurkic, Caleb Martin, and TJ McConnell coming back to the Suns.
That's the one I was hinting at.
Yeah,
too.
and I think at this point, I personally think the fact that I've talked to so many people that have heard the same rumor, I feel like it's probably dead and not going to happen. But it was supposedly something that may have been talked about at one point or another. And if true, I think it shows that the Suns probably are looking at somebody to potentially be that backup point guard that maybe TJ McConnell can play in the postseason, but probably not. Especially
Arizona,
if you're getting into the second or third rounds here.
Arizona guy, and we know how much Suns fans love the Arizona guys. I like TJ McConnell as a regular season player, but I'll be honest, this is just exactly who I was hinting at, the undersized guard who has had a really solid 4 or 5 year stint in Indiana. And in all that time, do you guys want to know how many minutes he's played in the playoffs? Less than 30. So it's kind of just what I was referring to of, are you really going to stake your mid-season acquisition on TJ McConnell? Yeah, I guess he eats innings in the regular season, but that would be about it.
I like it. I like him.
I mean, I would pounce at the opportunity of Caleb Martin on this team. That was actually one of I very rarely disagree with either of you, but I can't remember which one said that something about Caleb Martin's defense. And I think it was the Patreon pod. And I think that dude's like more closer to a caps lock defender than not. When you look at the level of assignments he takes on, specifically from the point of attack up to some of these bigger wings, like going back and looking at the players he either guarded the most or watching the film, like I think that's someone he comes in. What do I want? Is OG Anunoby a better fit? Yes, of course. But like if it ended up being like Nurkic and Caleb Martin as your like that's the Deandre Ayton package, I think you actually make out a lot better there than many people would probably believe.
I agree. I actually agree with that. I'm happy. I'm probably the person that cast a little doubt on his.
You didn't shit on him. I want to make that clear.
No, yeah, no. I think he's a good defender. But like we're talking about comparisons like OG Anunoby, just like you said here. So in comparison, what I think would be nice is, and this is so rare, and we're lucky that we had Mikal Bridges on this team for so long. It's just players that can guard from 1 to 4, and maybe Caleb Martin can do that in the right circumstances, but. Any team that doesn't have a Mikal Bridges is trying to get one at this point. And I think the Suns are still kind of looking for somebody to replace what he did on this team.
Sam, do you have any insight into or just guesses or interested in what stylistic changes you're expecting or hoping to see either on offense or defense with Frank Vogel running the show now?
Yeah, I think we've talked about it. Defense, I don't see too many changes. I think, we touched on it already, switching 1 through 4 and then keeping Ayton on the back end, really, comfortable in that drop. I think he might move a little bit less than he did under Monty. But frankly, even in the past couple of years, it felt like Ayton was moving his legs less on the perimeter than he was in some of his earlier years as part of the Monty stint. So defense, I don't know how many changes we're going to see. Offense, I think we're really hoping for a little bit more modern flair from this team. And so maybe that means some more Kevin Durant at the 5. I'm jumping ahead here, but I think, you want to know at one point in this podcast, like what are some lineups we're looking forward to? And just let's start with any lineup that features Kevin Durant at the 5. And then, maybe you throw Eric Gordon in there alongside Beal and Booker, and you throw Watanabe in the corner and you just bomb away from three, and you have maybe
Something
the best
else this team
offense.
could stand to do, by the way.
You-
Just bombing
yeah.
away from three.
You just have the best offense of all time, maybe in minutes where you play with those five guys. So, I think that's the big thing I'm looking for on offense, is just not as much of a focus on necessarily Deandre Ayton's pick and roll talents, where certainly he has some value to bring, but more of an emphasis on the 2-man game run between KD and Beal or KD and Booker. One guy could always be playing on the weak side. The other guy could be working dribble handoff games with KD at the elbow, and really focusing on the gravity that those guys bring on offense without worrying about a big man, sitting underneath the basket and kind of taking away some spacing.
Mike, it's probably taking me too long to get here, but I have so many Bradley Beal questions. And so I think it starts with, what is the biggest thing to you that he will bring or add in the context of this team?
It's a good question. The one thing I was thinking about, and this is not necessarily just Bradley Beal related, was without Chris Paul on this team, they're going to play a lot faster because Chris Paul just couldn't anymore. He just wanted to, and he doesn't ever like to be honest. Chris Paul played on slow teams like throughout his entire career. But without Chris Paul, I think the Suns will be able to play a lot faster. But I think if you look at what happened in the postseason for the Suns, even before Chris Paul was hurt, the majority of the offense shifted over to Devin Booker as the lead playmaker and guard. And when you have Chris Paul in the off-ball role, he's not built for that. He wants to dribble. He doesn't want to shoot. He doesn't really have a fast release on his catch and shoot shots anyway, so teams feel comfortable playing off of him. So the amount of space that this team is going to have, now it's tough to compare it to the playoffs because we were playing Josh Okogie as well, who nobody guards when he's at the three-point line. But the amount of space that this team will have with the player that's capable of playing off the ball as well as Bradley Beal can is kind of insane to even think about. And the other, Sam was talking about dribble handoffs. Bradley Beal was one of the best in the league at shooting off of dribble handoffs last season. I think his total percentage, forgive me, I'm going off memory, was 55% on dribble handoffs. So when he's taking the ball on those and flying around those screens, 55% is pretty insane. I mean, he can shoot from any point coming around that screen. So
that's where a lot of that rim pressure that Dan, I know, has talked about, comes from too, is on those plays.
Oh, and the rim pressure, by the way, too, compared to I think Chris Paul shot like less than 40% in the restricted area last season. If I'm not, Chris Paul was good on the Suns. I'm not trying to turn this into.
We both like him. Yeah,
I love Chris Paul.
There are some Suns fans who weirdly have like really turned in the opposite direction. Maybe they were just holding their tongues.
Well, he was secretly kind of bad last year.
Well, but it's like Chris Paul and Monty Williams did so much for the Suns organization over the past several years, and there were some people who, it just surprised me, some of the takes that came out kind of as soon as they were pushed out the door. I still have respect for both of those guys, even though I think they were flawed. I do want to address one thing real quick, Mike, because I'm not sure we've covered the pace angle from this perspective yet. Does the potential of acquiring 290-pound Jusuf Nurkic change your feelings at all about if this team is if this team is actually going to play faster? Because I was with you. I want them to play faster. And I know Vogel has said they're going to play faster. But then the Nurkic rumors come out, and suddenly it casts a little bit of doubt for me. So I don't know what you thought about that.
I personally have about a similar level of confidence of DeAndre and consistently sprinting down on offense as I do of Jusuf Nurkic at this point. We just have never seen DeAndre and do that on a regular basis. Occasionally, yes, but consistently over the course of a season, no. I'm not super excited about Nurkic in general, but I'm not really worried about that fit offensively. First of all, he's a great illegal screener, something I love to talk about. He just doesn't get called for those for some reason. Really good at screening, and a much better passer than Ayton. Ayton can pass the ball, but there's always another extra second or two of processing time with his passes that slows down the offense pretty significantly.
I know you were joking, but the trailing threes thing actually, I mean, I know Dan listened to our conversation. Like, he did actually shoot the ball well from three last year. So
and he's had like even the years he hasn't shot, like we're in year 2 or 3 now of the actual experimentation. So it's not just sort of a one-off with the volume. I think like he's been dabbled out there for a little bit. And so and you can look at it like they could just play faster by virtue. Mike mentioned the trail 3. So it's like even after a made shot, I would bet that their offense could technically be inherently faster with Nurkic than Ayton just because of those types of shots that would be available.
Yeah.
So I guess you already mentioned this, Sam, but is that sort of then the stylistic wrinkle that you expect the Suns to integrate most to try and optimize Bradley Beal? We're just going to see them run a bunch more, or maybe not a bunch more, but run more handoffs, or is it going to be different screening patterns? Like, what are you most fascinated to watch what this team does to try and optimize Bradley Beal?
I hope so. I hope we're seeing a lot of utilization of handoffs. Specifically, the one I was thinking of was with Kevin Durant. But it could work with Deandre Ayton or with Jusuf Nurkic as well. You know, those guys are good screeners. Besides that, we should note that Kevin Young is returning, the lead, the guy who's kind of the offensive coordinator, the offensive brain trust behind the Suns for last season. We don't know to what extent he is being given the reins to control the offense this year, but it would make sense to me that a lot of the features of the Suns offense last year, the elbow sets, the double drags, the Spain pick and rolls, are going to return. And any variation of those plays with just where you plug in Bradley Beal, Devin Booker, and Kevin Durant is going to work. It's just any variation where you have 3 players who are that versatile on offense, as long as the guys in the corner, or if it's Eric Gordon, standing 35 feet out above the wing, the spacing will work. It's just you plug in the players on this team, and I have no qualms about any of that.
Mike, aside from the defensive matchup equation, what is the biggest concern you have about Bradley Beal's potential fit on this team?
It's not an exciting conversation in its injuries. I mean, it's not necessarily about the basketball fit, I guess I'll say, because, you know, for him, it's about staying healthy. This team, in order for it to succeed, because it is top heavy, they all have to be healthy for extended periods of times in the playoffs. I do think the level of star talent means that maybe at times they could withstand somebody missing a game or two, the way that they actually have in the past. You know, Chris Paul missed games in the Clippers series when they went to the finals. Devin Booker missed games in the New Orleans series when they beat New Orleans, and still the Suns were capable of winning. But I even think they're more built to withstand that kind of thing now. With multiple stars, but any sort of long-term injury is probably the scariest part. But I do think, just from an overall perspective, if you're looking at the team, just to give Chris Paul credit for how good he was last year, he never turned the ball over. Just never turned the ball over. And as good as all of these guys are at playmaking, they don't have the type of unbelievable assist-to-turnover ratios that Chris Paul had. So this team, as they do milk all the playmaking they can out of these 3 offensive threats, probably will have a dramatic increase in turnovers, which is just a little scary when it comes to transition defense. They need to get back. They need to play defense. And overall, not just Bradley Beal, the team as a whole needs to make a concerted effort to take care of the ball as much as possible.
Were you going to say something, Sam? Go ahead.
Well, I'm going to use Mike's slogan for him. The slogan he's been using all throughout the summer is everyone does everything. And I think just transition defense is going to be one of those things where it applies. We're doing positionless basketball. We're doing the thing. We're playing modern basketball here in 2023. You know, is Bradley Beal the point guard? Is Devin Booker the point guard? Is Kevin Durant? Like, who cares? Everyone's doing everything on this team. And yeah, but you know what? It doesn't matter. You care because if you want to maybe rank these players in a certain way, like, is Devin Booker the best shooting guard in the NBA or not? Who cares? We don't know what position he even plays at this point. So everyone on this team is going to be kind of playing a fluid role.
Sam, who among the big 3 here is going to need to make like either the most conceits on offense or have to make the most adaptations on offense?
This is a really good question. All of them are. I think it's probably still Bradley Beal at the end of the day. He is going to start a lot of possessions with the ball in his hands. The opportunities just are not there for him to play in the same way that he did in Washington. I think that's the guy. I mean, at the end of the day, if you're sorting through the stats and you're looking at the various play types and you're thinking, who really needs the ball in his hands in the last 5 minutes of the fourth quarter? Like, who should really get the ISO possessions? And the stats that Booker and Durant are posting are going to mostly blow Beal's stats out of the water because he is just not the player that he was in 2018, 2019. And so he's going to make the most offensive concessions, I would think. There's still a pathway for Bradley Beal to average 25 points per game on this team. We've yet to do our yearly over-under podcast.
I know what you're going to pick.
Say.
I know what you're going to pick on that one.
No, not necessarily, because I don't know. Mike is always the one, he sets over-unders for, like, statistically for everyone on our team, and we have a lot of fun, and we kind of play against our audience where they pick over and unders against us. And so we've yet to do that episode. That should be fun. I don't know how to evaluate what our expectations are just statistically of Beal this season, but I would say there's a pathway there for him to get up there.
I do wonder, part of me has wondered if it could end up being Kevin Durant.
Me too.
The two things are, you guys have mentioned it already, him, if he has to play center at all, like that'll be an adjustment if that becomes a staple. But the other thing is sort of when you watch how defenses reacted to him in the playoffs, like throughout his career, but specifically the past two postseasons and how he's kind of struggled, that might be a change for him if he has to become more of the deferential guy, or he can't hold on to the ball necessarily as much as he's a great off-ball player, but I'm just saying if he has to become more of a ball mover or connector, that's not something that he's like needed to do in high volume, because you don't necessarily want him to do that. But on this team, I'm wondering, and Mike, you had said something, so is that like kind of where you're at, or is it a different pathway to him having to adapt if you're envisioning it?
I hate to put it this succinctly, but he's 35, and at a certain point over this contract, the skills will diminish. Now they haven't yet in a lot of ways for him, but I do agree with you that if you look at playoff stats and playoff efficiency, turnover rate, like it has mostly gone down for him from the regular season to the playoffs over the course of his career. But, you know, like I do think that, and the reason I think it has to be a big change for Kevin Durant is that he's used to having the ball in all the biggest moments all the time. And I think there will be a time on this team where that has to shift to Devin Booker, or that has to shift to Bradley Beal. Do I think there's going to be a Draymond Green moment yelling at each other on the floor like in Golden State? No, because it's different when Draymond Green has the ball compared to Devin Booker or Bradley Beal. And I think they're very close right now, and I think they're on the same page basketball-wise. But if we're looking at sort of these three guys on their full contracts on this team, there will be a point, and it could be this season, where the most important player on the team has to be Devin Booker. And I think a lot of people believe it's right now, including Kevin Garnett, who had a conversation about this on his podcast very loudly. And, you know, I don't know when that's going to be, but at a certain point, Durant has to be okay shifting off the ball for extended periods of time.
I will say he does have years worth of experience watching Russell Westbrook take shots out of turn, even Eric Maynor a little bit. So this might be a little easier for him. You mentioned who is the most, I guess, important to this. I always just viewed it as Devin Booker, but I feel like there's also the pathway to Kevin Durant there, depending on what type of role you think he's going to shoulder defensively. But are you guys just both at, Devin Booker is, to tie this all together, Devin Booker is going to be, I'm not trying to get you to rank them, but just in terms of most singular importance, Sam, do you just view it as it's still Devin Booker?
We're talking about two-way impact, singular importance overall.
Even looking at who's going to, like, the defensive workload they're going to have to carry. And then I think the playmaking one is, you could say positionless, but it's going to be, I think at the end of the day, there's still going to be like one guy who becomes sort of the central playmaker. No
doubt. And Booker, of those three guys, is the most talented in his ability to make advanced reads. I think that you can say that without a doubt. And defensively, I think, is a guy who kind of falls in the perfect body type where he's going to be taking on a lot of these challenging defensive assignments. So yeah, if you just evaluate it from both sides, I agree with that assessment. It is Devin Booker.
Well, how does Devin Booker's role change on this team, Mike, with the moves that have, I get basically just with the addition of Bradley Beal and Kevin Durant, and now you don't have Chris Paul, or even you just don't have like that orthodox point guard on the team?
Yeah, I think there's two guys that are missing from Devin Booker that will now require him to increase his role on both sides of the floor, and that's Chris Paul and Mikal Bridges. Every single game since Mikal Bridges was drafted on the Suns, every single game Devin Booker played until the trade, Mikal Bridges was on the floor for, because he never missed a game, meaning Devin Booker got to play a lot of minutes with Mikal Bridges. in his time with the Suns. And, a lot has been made of Devin Booker's improvements on defense. I think most of that is shown in the playoffs because he sort of saves it a little bit for the playoffs. I don't think he can anymore. I think that defensive effort has to be pretty dramatically increased in the regular season because we brought it up, the team that we brought up as an example. And look, they're going to have their own problems guarding the Suns. But if the Suns are playing the Dallas Mavericks, for example, and you start Keita Bates-Diop to guard Luka Doncic, who guards Kyrie Irving, I think it has to be Devin Booker at this point in the starting five because the other options are Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal, or Devin Booker. And I think Devin Booker is the most well-equipped to take that assignment. And there are teams where he's going to have to guard the first or second best offensive player for the majority of the minutes that he plays in the starting five. So defensively, I think that's a huge change for him. Offensively, you're right. I mean, he's the point guard now, I think, regardless of what Shams Charania says about Bradley Beal. And that's just, to me, he said it more as a height thing as far as Bradley Beal is now playing point guard for the Suns. I do think that
he was looking at B-ball reference data and then
right. I mean, like in a way he's right too, because like they both kind of are, it's not a traditional way to figure out who plays point guard and who doesn't. But, Devin Booker has averaged 6.8 assists in his career on the Suns. And, the expectation for him is probably to match or maybe even exceed that number going forward and keeping the turnovers down, which I think he did really well in the last 2 years. And I'm pretty confident in his ability to do that. And I'm pretty excited to see what kind of stats he puts up this year, because I think it could be a pretty impressive season for him.
Sam, do you have anything to add or differs from that?
Not particularly. Beal will play a lot of point guard.
Between you two. Just save wavelength. Incredible.
No, not always. You haven't asked us about Bol yet. That's where we really diverge.
I don't really want to have to, but I guess I will at some point.
I don't know if
sounds like me and Dan are on the same wavelength there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's okay. You can be wrong. That's fine. Beal will play a lot of point guard as well, but in the staggered sense. Again, if we're not really trusting Jordan Goodwin, there will be a lot of staggered lineups here between these two guys. So I think we focus so much on how seamlessly they'll fit when all three are on the court together. But we also know that, I think there's just going to be a lot of minutes of Beal logging with the second unit. We'll see how that works.
I'm surprised how, not that you guys are low, I really like Jordan Goodwin. I guess I'm high.
I like him. No, I do.
Ceiling. I don't want to say don't ever because that defeats the purpose of having him, but watching him run pick and rolls is a little painful when you look at that decision making, but like defenses can still scramble. He's got a little wiggle there. And then, as you both have mentioned, just the defensive value, if you're worried about point of attack stuff, I'm just wondering if he's someone who could low-key play a bigger role than expected.
He could. It's a great point. I see a clear pathway for him to be a 9th or 10th man in the regular season. I just don't see him surviving the cuts as we head to a playoff rotation. But yeah, if you look at the options that we have for point of attack defense, it's either Josh Okogie, who's not going to be guarded on offense at all. Of course, I always hope that Okogie one of these days puts it together and becomes the 40% three-point shooter that I want him to be.
He needs to put you on the payroll, Sam.
Yeah, for real.
If he does.
It was awful in the playoffs. Awful.
Because, shut up. Because, do you want me to bring up the net rating stats for the last 8 games of the regular season when he played with KD? Because it was awesome. And if you extrapolate those numbers, then there's a pathway for Josh Okogie to become, I always say that he's a $15 million a year player if he could just learn to shoot. That's how talented he is defensively. So who knows? But yeah, Goodwin after him, Goodwin's the next best guy. He's the next best guy to be that point of attack defender, really against smaller guards under the 6'4", 6'5". So he could definitely play a role.
There's very little doubt in me defensively how good he could be on this team. He's just built for it. I think where I'm less confident in him is as the primary backup point guard, because there will be games where Bradley Beal isn't playing or Devin Booker isn't playing, and now they can't necessarily stagger those two guys, and his role as a playmaker, as an offensive player, is increased without another guy to step in and help him the way that maybe even a combination of him and Cameron Payne could have been. So that's where I'm a little bit concerned. I do think that there will even be lineups where it is the starting 4, if you want to call them that, the 4 guys we know will start, plus Jordan Goodwin, and that actually could be really interesting. Maybe when we're playing Steph Curry or something, and now he's tasked with running around and guarding Steph Curry, and his offensive deficiencies will be completely covered up by the rest of the guys.
So Kevin Durant, and look, I can't, some of these questions just feel it's nitpicking, and I'm looking at this team, and the Suns just have like three of the like most elite offensive players. It's just incredible. With Kevin Durant though, trying to figure out a concern, his rim pressure dipped in Phoenix, even relative to his already low rim pressure. Mike, was there anything behind that? Was it just lack of familiarity with the team? Was it the knee and ankle stuff he was dealing with, a focus on lower energy shots? Was it all of it? Was it anything? Is it cause for concern or no?
I think it's a combination of knee and ankle, mostly ankle. I mean, that rolling of the ankle came at the worst possible time for the Suns, where he just missed games and went into the playoffs probably not fully healthy. But getting older, he just doesn't necessarily drive as much. Interestingly, I looked at the drives per game stats for him, and on the Suns, he was like 5 drives per game. And the last time he had any sort of drives like that was actually on the Warriors. But in Brooklyn, it was pretty high. So I'm not exactly sure how to like put that together as far as what it's going to be looking forward for the Suns. But I think that over the aggregate, over a longer period of time, I think you can expect that his rim pressure will go down, just as it does with most players as they get older and older. So the Suns have to be prepared for that and adjust for that. And that's the kind of conversation we've had with him taking more of an off the ball, maybe shooter role.
I think also that's kind of the importance of like, if you believe, and you guys have mentioned this a couple times now, his age. And if like he's never been for the past few years, he's not getting to the rim a ton. If you expect that to kind of continue to pull back or stay where, I don't think it's going to be like 4% or whatever it was during his 8 games during the regular season. But knowing how little Chris Paul got to the rim, and now you gave up Mikal Bridges to get Kevin Durant, like your on-ball rim pressure is pretty much non-existent at that point unless you make the like Devin Booker can still do it, but I feel like he's more of an off-ball guy there. And so getting Bradley Beal feels like it could be huge too if they want to start getting more rim pressure, winning free throw battles. I think that's the one of the other upsides too. There's so many, but of acquiring Bradley Beal,
it has to be coming from Beal, principally. Also, though, you can view it from the lens of a lot of these minimum signings that they made. I don't think this was the primary reason they made any of these signings, but a lot of these guys are just upgrades in terms of their rim pressure over the guys they were replacing. Landry Shamet never got to the rim. Eric Gordon is a 3-and-D Morey ball style player who still can do it even at his age. It's not, the primary way that he plays, but he can do it. Keita Bates-Diop can get to the rim more than Terrence Ross, who's just going to sit there in the corner and chuck threes. So there are these guys who they're also replacing off the bench, where I think you're going to get a little bit of extra rim pressure out of each of those acquisitions. Mostly it's coming from Bradley Beal, though, for sure.
Devin Booker and Kevin Durant shot better from mid-range than Chris Paul and Landry Shamet shot in the restricted area. That's a real stat.
Chris Paul's 38. He's like 6 foot.
Of course,
5'11".
he's got an excuse, right? Of course, but those guys played real playoff minutes for the Suns last year, and they're not on the team anymore. But I Bradley Beal, I think Suns fans are in for a treat just because the Suns just don't have. They've watched these slow, methodical pick and rolls by both Chris Paul and Devin Booker for years, and Bradley Beal is like a rocket compared to them on a lot of pick and rolls, and I think Suns fans are going to have a blast watching that. Not to make.
By the way, Dan, this is another just quick argument for Josh Okogie. If you're like egging, no, but shut up for a second. If you're egging me on here to make positive arguments for Josh Okogie, who averaged 5 free throw attempts per 36 minutes last year. Just want to say that is a place where he can stand out a little bit on offense. Sometimes it's useful to have a reckless player who just hurls his body at the defense and gets positive outcomes from it, which is something that very few players on the Suns roster did last season, but Josh Okogie can do that.
Is this team now, I think with the Bradley Beal addition mainly, but you've now mentioned it with some of their minimum contract acquisitions, are they built then to put significantly more pressure on the rim? I think they're built to win more free throw battles. And the other element of this is, do you think it's not really, are they built for it? Would you expect them to do like a better job of, let's say, catering to the 3-point math, Mike?
Well, it's funny because you could make the case that they're built much more to be like a Morey ball type team, if you want to call it that, except that their 3 stars just shoot a lot of mid-range shots, especially Devin Booker and Kevin Durant. So, outside of that, I think the addition of Bradley Beal and his ability to get to the rim is pretty important. And I think the combination of that and the spacing that a lot of the shooting provides will open up a lot of cutting lanes for players to get to the rim. But without a doubt, they're going to shoot more threes. I think that's one of the reasons that Monty Williams is no longer the coach of the Phoenix Suns, is not really adjusting to that modern style of offense and the sort of unwillingness to do that. You know, they ended up shooting a lot of mid-range shots, not just Devin Booker and Chris Paul, everyone. And that includes a lot of players just opting for floaters over and over and over again instead of attacking the rim and trying to get free throws, or turning down 3-point shots to drive into defense and shoot off-footed floaters.
Was that a Monty problem or was that a personnel problem? I view that personally as a personnel problem.
I think it's both.
Because if Chris Paul will not sit his old ass down, what are you supposed to do with Chris Paul playing that many minutes?
He's allowed to do it. And the stars should still be allowed to do it. Mid-range shots have their place in the NBA. I am not one of those guys that say every mid-range shot is a bad shot. I think that a player's ability to score from the mid-range has a massive effect on their ability to make plays for other players, because that's what draws defense to the middle of the floor, opens up shots both at the rim and at the three-point line. Stars are allowed to do it, but everyone else kind of being able and capable to shoot three-point shots. You're right, Sam. They have more players that can do it now. And that does make a big difference. But I will say in the playoffs for the Suns, they had players that could do it as well, and they didn't play. You know,
That's
Monty
true.
played other guys instead.
I will say, even if they can't put like noticeably more pressure on the basket itself, the ability for all of their top guys to just draw fouls without getting to the basket. You know, Kevin Durant in the playoffs last year, 7% of his shots, a small sample size, but they come at the rim. And like, he still has the highest free throw attempt rate on the team among non-bigs. Just absolutely unreal. Again, it's why I feel like any concerning questions I bring up are so stupid, but we need content. Are there any, we're entering the cookie cutter portion of the podcast. Are you both ready?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Sam, are there any strengths or concerns about this team that we haven't talked about yet that you think need to be discussed?
Any strengths or concerns? We've talked about injuries. We have. I think we've talked about playmaking.
The only concern, I guess, it's injuries plus WTF Ayton is really.
I think the top three are Ayton. What happens without Chris Paul to the playmaking, and in that adjustment, and health, and those are the main ones, right, Mike? I'm not missing any
defense. Yeah. The Suns defense and this is just because half their games were against the Denver Nuggets, but the Suns had the worst defense in the playoffs last season after the trade by defensive efficiency. So I think defense is a concern.
So what does, and I'll throw it to you first, Mike, what does if you're building a 10-man rotation, or if you want to call it the top 10 most played guys on this team look like? It feels, I guess, like there's very clearly a top 6 when you're just looking at who are the best players, how are they going to play with, or the top 5, I guess, Devin Booker, Bradley Beal, Kevin Durant, Deandre Ayton, and Eric Gordon, like you all know we're going to play. And then it feels like it could be absolutely anarchy after that. It's like, how do you flesh out like the other 5 spots in a 10-man rotation?
I think they want to be younger this year, and you can tell that just by the players that they signed. But I think Yuta, Keita Bates-Diop, Eubanks are the 3 players that I think these are the guys that they want to play a lot of minutes. Outside of that, I don't know. Sam, do you have any opinions outside of those guys as far as who's going to be playing off the bench? Because I'm curious what you think. We haven't really talked too much about this.
Wait, so sorry, are you starting Eric Gordon or Bates-Diop?
Yeah, we're including Eric Gordon in the 5 most important players. So then we have Keita Bates-Diop, not necessarily starting, just Keita Bates-Diop, Yuta Watanabe, Eubanks.
Then it's Watanabe, Eubanks, Okogie are 7, 8,
Okogie,
9.
there's the other one.
Yeah. And I think your big question is who's 10. I am leaning towards Jordan Goodwin for my 10th most important player on this team. One guy who we have not mentioned at all, though, is Damian Lee, who they brought back. And I think this was actually surprising. Granted, a lot of this is because of how many moves we made at the deadline last year. But Damian Lee played the 6th most minutes for the Suns last season at 1,500 minutes. He shot 45% from deep. I don't think he's a player with an extraordinary number of strengths outside of just really, really above average spot up shooting. But he was more
smart.
He was more than solid in his role. He's another one of these players, by the way. Absolutely no rim pressure coming from Damian Lee, and was
floaters.
When we talk about their lack of rim pressure last year, the fact that a guy like Damian Lee is playing the 6th most minutes on the team has something to do with that. But I see him slotting in at various points throughout the regular season for sure. If I had to lean on a guy who I think is like rounding out my second unit right now, though, it's probably Jordan Goodwin over Damian Lee. And then, of course, the super fun wild card, who's probably really not in the rotation, but he looked really good in Summer League, is Toumani Camara, who was drafted 52nd in overall in
he
the
looked
draft
awesome.
this season.
I don't know if you saw Dan, but he looked awesome.
did not. I won't even pretend to know anything about him.
Was a total jack of all trades in the Summer League, who would just be really fun if he can kind of bring any of that combined offensive and defensive impact to a rookie season in the NBA. We're kind of just desperate for young talent on this team, which is why we're bringing him up. But I hope we get to see some minutes from him that are not just garbage time.
I'm just going to mention a player that I think that he could be in the mold of, Dan. For you, when you see him, I want you to think about Larry Nance Jr. and not senior, Larry Nance Jr. He doesn't play like a 58-year-old, NBA player, former NBA player, but no, Larry Nance Jr. He kind of reminded me of him. Now, whether or not he can reach any sort of potential of that, it is, if he can, then James Jones, it feels free to boast about that after missing out on Halliburton. But I think he's going to be good. And I want to mention too, by the way, Chimezie Metu, the Suns. I don't know what his role is going to be on the Suns. I feel like he's probably the player that Sam and I have talked about the least in this offseason. But
he was one of the most puzzling of the minimum signings to me. And obviously, some guys
it was
just
day
one
your
bench. Right, but he was
day one. They won
because we did our whole free agency predictions or free projections and talking about rumors, and like people were speculating about Yuta, for instance, to the Suns for weeks before it happened, as soon as the Beal trade hit, because there's an established relationship there between him and KD. So Yuta was not a surprise.
Yeah, KD mentioned his name, and it was curtains as far as everybody was concerned about that.
Eubanks, I remember I mentioned on our free agency projection pods, Eubanks was not a major surprise. Yuta was not a major surprise, but Metu was the third guy that came in on that first day of free agency where we kind of scratched our heads a little bit and we're like, really? Would you rather have that guy as your third string center over, say, just bringing back Bismack Biyombo, which they did not do? But we'll see. Does
he play in two big lineups? Is I think, is Frank Vogel trying to figure out a way to come up with some sort of two big lineups? He has not yet been great at that in Sacramento, but I don't know. It's just a guy I want to mention because maybe they see something we don't, and he becomes a player who plays a bigger role than we expected.
I think it's very fun, the fact that he took basically half of his field goal attempts, like close to 200 threes, not this past season, but the season before, shot 31% on them, and then basically gave up this past year and didn't shoot them again. So I would love to see what they're thinking there.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll see.
I'll phrase the question this way, Mike. Who do you think, and if it's the same answer, obviously that's fine. What do you think ends up being, assuming health, their most used starting lineup and their most used closing lineup?
Yeah, I think, Vogel has actually talked quite a bit about this, and he is saying that the starting lineup is not going to be set in stone, that it could change on a game-to-game basis based on matchups. Not a huge fan of that personally, but I do understand it based on the personnel the Suns have. And I also think that that's kind of why they're potentially shopping Deandre Ayton at this point, to try to solidify what that starting five will be, in that they bring in a player that's clearly the starting 4 or 3 or whatever you want to call it. But I think the closing lineups, I think we can be pretty confident that Eric Gordon is going to be in them. And if we're assuming DeAndre Ayton is playing at center and not Kevin Durant, then that's pretty clear. If it does end up being a situation where the Suns are going small to close games, I think Eric Gordon will still be in there. And then that fifth player, probably Keita Bates-Diop or Yuta Watanabe in that scenario. Maybe Toumani Camara, just throwing it out there as the Larry Nance role.
The next PJ Tucker type thing.
Yeah, probably.
Toumani Camara is, because I'll just say this. We watched Ish Wainwright. We were so desperate the last few years for young talent, Dan. You don't even know. We watched Ish Wainwright in Summer League for the Suns in multiple seasons. And I think Toumani Camara is significantly more skilled.
Yeah.
Ish Wainwright
averaged like 3 points in Summer League. Toumani averaged like 18.
Ish Wainwright is a fun story.
Yeah.
Because he is a thick-ass human, but he, as a basketball player, he is mostly a meme when we talk about his impact, if I have to be entirely honest. Toumani Camara, I have some actual faith in. We'll see.
Yeah. But starting lineup, I think they're not going to start Eric Gordon, even if I want it. And I think Keita Bates-Diop probably has the best path to being the most common starting lineup.
Do you differ anywhere there, Sam?
No, I do not. I'll go with the same one.
So Sam, what is the quirky, unconventional, maybe they won't try it, but they absolutely should weirdo lineup you would like to see from this team?
Well, let's stick Bol at point guard. I mean, let's flip the whole equation on its
Yeah,
head.
fuck defense. Like, yeah.
I do think this team has, if you just look from a pure wingspan perspective, would this be a good defensive lineup? I'm not sure. But Bol has a, what does he have? A 7'8" wingspan?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
So if you played Bol at power forward next to Deandre Ayton, let me, sorry, I have to organize this in my head a little bit. Let's say Booker, if Booker is at point guard, Bates-Diop could be at shooting guard. That's a 7'3" wingspan. Kevin Durant is at small forward. That's a 7'6" wingspan. Bol is at power forward. That's a 7'8" wingspan. And DeAndre Ayton is at center. That's a 7'6" wingspan. That has to be in contention for one of the longest lineups in NBA history, I would think. And they could do it. They could do that.
Mike, what's yours?
I think, Sam, you got to replace Devin Booker with Josh Okogie in that lineup just because it's hilarious. Look, I think offensively, of course, is my first thought, and I think they can put together some lineups that just bomb threes, and it might not be as fun as Sam's, but the combination of Bradley Beal, Devin Booker, and Eric Gordon, Yuta Watanabe, and Kevin Durant at center, and just the spacing is just absolute. You have the 52% corner 3-point shooter in Yuta Watanabe, and then Eric Gordon 35 feet out. And then you have Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal, and Devin Booker just with all of that space. Now you run inverted pick and rolls where Eric Gordon is screening for Kevin Durant, and then all the other guys are standing around the 3-point line. Then good luck. What do you do in that case? Good luck.
Yeah, those are probably lineups that they should explore for sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I actually don't have one for this team because I feel like they're not built to get super weird because Kevin Durant at the 5, to me, just the way they're built shouldn't be considered weird, but I am now any weirdo or unconventional lineup needs to have Toumani Camara in it now.
There you go.
You're going to like him. You're going to watch a random League Pass game of the Suns against like the Hornets in November or something, and he's going to play like 15 minutes and he's going to really impress you.
Who was it that we were tagging you in clips? Was it Jock Landale? It was Jock Landale, I think. Yeah. Last year, I told you on this podcast last year, I said, Jock Landale's really good. You'll see. And I started tagging you in clips of him during the season. And then look at him. He outplayed DeAndre Ayton in a playoff game and closed a game while DeAndre Ayton sat on the bench. So now we're doing the same, I think, with Toumani Camara. We're going to tag you in clips, highlights of him. From season.
I know nothing about, like, Jock Landale. I think, what did Toronto had him at one point and let him go? Like, they got him in a trade. I thought that was dumb. So, like, I understood that was a basket, but like, I don't know anything about this kid. So
nobody did. Yeah.
Please tag me in that. So it needs to be KD, Camara. Like, I want it to be all bigs, but no big. And so, like, that's not fair to Booker and Beal, but we'll go Camara, KD, Yuta Watanabe. And how we're getting bigger. I don't really want to see Met too.
Bol. It's got
yeah, I mean, it has to be Bol.
I mean, yeah.
Don't be a hater.
Then, you know what? We'll give it to Devin Booker. Devin Booker can be in
Put
that
Nurkic in there.
So is their current win total, as we're recording this on September 23rd, is 52.5.
Yeah.
Mike, are you taking the over or the under on that?
I would take the over pretty confidently, because even with injuries, I think that they are going to be really good. I think the West is really good though. And I think last year the West was kind of not very good due to a lot of weird and different circumstances. And every team, we did a podcast where we covered every team's moves. Almost every single team in the West got better. Obviously, Portland is going to get worse at some point, but like a lot of teams in the West got better this offseason. And so it might be hard, but I feel like they're going to win more. 53 doesn't feel out of the question for me, I guess.
Sam, are you in lockstep?
Yes, but it's just weird how our expectations like have been recalibrated with the Western Conference, because we're used to these years. I feel like, I mean, for me growing up, it was like every year the top teams in the Western Conference were going 62-20. And right now we're in just such a golden age of parity that it's like, correct me if I'm wrong, where are the Suns ranked there? Are they probably second in the conference after Denver? If I had to guess.
That's the only
Denver was 53 wins last year, and they were the number 1 seed, right?
Right. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. That is super weird. I remember
crazy.
When the Suns. I remember multiple times in the Western Conference. Maybe it only happened once, where like an 8th seeded team was a 50-win team. That happened in the Western Conference within the past 15 years. Now we're talking about a first or second seed winning 53 games. So I'm going to take the over, even understanding that the parity will work against us in some ways. But
I will say they are now tied with the Nuggets for the highest over/under on this.
What would
date
you
in the
pick,
West.
Dan?
I'll give it.
Are
We
you
haven't done
saving
the
it?
What's
Yeah.
that?
Are you saving it for a podcast? You can save it.
Yeah, I'm gonna save it.
Okay.
But I mean, I think you could pretty much guess.
Yeah.
And so I normally phrase the question. This will be the spoiler on it. Of how many teams are you prepared to guarantee are better than Team X in the Western Conference if they're playing in the West? That's not really a fun question because I think you can say the Nuggets, but it's not guaranteed. And then there's just no options after that. So I'll ask you this, Sam. Is there looking at the playoffs specifically, is there a matchup that is still one or two like particularly concerning for you if you're looking at the Suns roster without Nurkic, of course? Like let's look at this Suns. Let's look at this version of the Suns roster.
Yeah. When I look at the Western Conference, no. Let's see. Beyond the Nuggets, no. Is that unreasonable to say? I think there are a lot of teams that would be fun to match up with. I look forward to our first round matchup against the Thunder this year, where everyone is rooting for the Thunder because it will be them on their come up. That should be fun. But beyond that, no, not really. I mean, there are a lot of teams that could be really, really good in the Western Conference, but they have so many questions. Teams that we've matched up with before, the Clippers, what the hell are the Clippers doing? The Pelicans continue to have injury questions. The Grizzlies, we've never matched up with. I guess you have to throw the Warriors in there. We've still never gotten a Suns-Warriors playoff series.
Do you?
I just think it would be fun.
I'm terrified of them. Yeah.
The entertainment factor, sure, but I can't. I guess they could give them some problems, but like that core is old, and that team feels more paper tigery this year. And I love Steph, like one of my favorite players of all time. But that team feels more like a paper tiger in this.
I mean, the Chris Paul narrative alone makes them super fun to watch potentially implode or potentially succeed. I'm not rooting against them per se. I still like Chris Paul, but I think that's an objectively hilarious situation that he's found.
Game one of the seasons.
This is not related, but have you guys been accused of hating Chris Paul? The amount of times you needed to clarify that you like him on this podcast is quite frankly concerning.
No, I've never been accused of hating Chris Paul. It's more so the fact that Chris Paul, as kind of the NBA's mercenary that he's been over the past several years of hopping from team to team and then just making them really good. Basketball fans appreciate his impact, like neutral basketball fans. And I think history actually will be kind to Chris Paul, regardless of whether or not he wins a ring. But he kind of just doesn't have a ton of built-in fans wherever he goes. And so like he made objectively a huge impact on the Suns organization over the past 3 years. And yet now he's been gone for several months. And kind of it feels like to a segment of the fan base, it's like he was never here. Well, so I feel more of a necessity to defend him, if anything.
There is also a contingent of Suns fans who blame DeAndre Ayton's failures on some sort of combination of Chris Paul and Monty Williams. And I think there's part of me, I don't get it either.
Did Chris Paul, was he staring at him like too intently at one point? I guess Chris Paul can be grading, but that's an interesting way to look at it.
So I try to make sure to distance myself from those takes when talking about him. I don't want people to confuse me for one of the people that believe that.
Mike, really quickly, did you have any matchups that you could view as particularly not necessarily compelling, but problematif for this team?
It's funny because then this is in no way my confidence that they're going to make the finals. But you know that GIF of that dog that it has PTSD, where they're like showing him a plate of cupcakes. Sam, no. You know what I'm talking about.
I
right?
know exactly what you're talking about. This is a classic
that was
GIF,
like,
Dan. Come on.
Yeah, that was like me staring into the air and just seeing Giannis dunk on the Suns over and over and over again. So there's that Giannis PTSD that I have. Of course, there's Giannis is in the news for other reasons right now with threatening the Bucks at every chance that he can get.
As long as we're talking about the East, we've never really seen. I mean, of course, Beal just came and KD's been on this team for 20 games, but we've never really seen any good matchups between this team and the Celtics because they only play each other twice a year. Those are obvious dates you have to circle on the calendar.
And the for some reason the NBA schedulers constantly put the Suns on a going east and playing at noon game in Boston every year, and they have to play against the Celtics at a weird time every year. I hope they don't do that this year. I haven't checked the schedule, but that is an interesting matchup that I'm looking forward to in the regular season because of the Porzingis trade.
If they met in the finals and I was making that prediction now, I would pick Suns in 5. I'm so out on the playoff version of the Celtics. Yeah.
Really? That surprises me.
Sam, I know you have to go, so I don't want to bore you with the details, but you decided to trade your best passer for a guy who had a better passing season last year, but is not a playmaker, who has more injury issues, who's coming off a career year for one of the most nondescript teams in NBA history. And now you're less versatile defensively. So I guess you're not going to switch anymore. So the money that's invested in that front line is fine. And maybe they end up amounting to 2 centers because of Al Horford getting old and the injury concerns with KP and RW3. But the Celtics are at an even worse playmaking deficit now. And I think that they're a lot less versatile. They'll probably win a bunch of games in the regular season still. I just don't. That's not a team that I can't bring myself to pick them or even consider them to come out of the East right now. I'm not.
That's incredible. Have you done your Celtics preview pod yet?
No, so
who the heck are you going to talk to, man, for that episode?
I haven't decided yet because the person I normally talk to just is in the process of becoming an NBA agent and would rather not wade into those waters anymore. So
that rocks.
I'll let you know when I decide. This was great, guys. Is there anything we left off really quickly that I didn't ask you about that you think needs to be covered?
Sam, don't say Bol, please.
I was going to, so now I've been muzzled.
Mentions. I think
we said his name. We said his name. I think we're good. Yeah.
Are you guys able? So I'll start with you, Sam. Are you just able to tell our listeners where they can find you guys and all the great content that you're putting out?
Yeah, find me on Twitter or X or whatever you call it, at SCooperHoops. That's where most of my, look, I'm on Blue Sky and Threads too. Do people use those? I don't know.
Oh, I have 153 followers on Blue Sky. So
yeah,
that you're in the top 10%, I think. Then
just listen to our podcast. I think the internet is in a weird place right now, and if you want Suns takes on a weekly basis, you know where to find us. You don't have to listen to every episode, but if you want to just check in from time to time, we would greatly appreciate it. I think that's all for me.
Mike, where can they find you?
At Protected Pick on Twitter. I'm still going to call it Twitter. I don't care if that's old now, but also TikTok. I don't post a lot right now, but in the regular season, I try to break down offensive plays for the Suns there if you want to see some video content. But yes, the podcast is called The Timeline of Phoenix Suns Podcast. You can find it on all podcast apps. And if you really like us, we have a Patreon and you could join that as well. You'll find it.
I will say, this isn't the necessarily endorsement that matters, but I don't pay for a lot of just team-specific content. I pay for the Timelines content because these guys are fantastic. You can find the link to where you can subscribe to the pod and their Patreon in the podcast and YouTube description. As you both know by now, I'll be pestering you again in the future. Thank you so much, as usual, for giving me a boatload of your time.
Of course, Dan.
Looking forward to it as always. Thank you, Dan.